which in some cases include the direct transfer of arms. And we found that some of the most active in arms transfer operations are the Russian, American, British, and Israeli private military companies. Also, we found and documented recently in the circumstances in the Middle East and Africa that the United Arab Emirates also have been involved in using mercenaries to transfer weapons to rabid forces in Sudan. And there are more evidence now that emerged on this. I will not talk too much.
Situations of conflicts. And I was working in Africa, organizing trainings for armed forces, for security forces, and sometimes for non-state armed groups, explaining the work of the Red Cross and then passing the basic rules of international maritime law. And then at the end of the 90s, I saw new people coming in. There were people with sunglasses, older men, but very fit, working for private companies, American consultants. They all had a long experience in the armed forces, especially in special forces. And they were recycled after the Cold War, after their battles and experiences in different conflicts, into a private military sector.
I think I'm extremely pleased to see Maat for Peace. You have been so active in the Intergovernmental Working Group, must I say, one of the rare NGOs present in the negotiations of the future, I would like to say, treaty, legally binding instrument on PMCs, but let's address this later. And I'm happy to see other familiar faces. So hi, Vincent, nice to see you again, to be on the same panel. So I'm glad Vincent had this overview of the historical part. I'll just remind that mercenarism is actually as old as the war itself. And it has been present since the antiquity until today. And as Vincent actually well put it, it has presented in different forms over the time. And particularly since the wars of decolonization and the emergence of civil wars around particularly African continent. With the end of the Cold War, we have seen the phenomenon changing the forms, revival, and the needs of different types of mercenaries. In particular, what we called at the beginning corporate mercenaries, when the private military and security companies emerged, slightly through the independence wars across Africa. But I must say the first real test was not in Iraq and Afghanistan, as is very often said, but it was actually the former Yugoslavia. During the war in the Yugoslavia, there have been all sorts of mercenaries and private securities involved, and aftermath of the war, a market of different competence across the world developed, and then we've seen the striking rise through the wars in Afghanistan.
Like combats are typically linked to military actors, and tasks such as protecting infrastructure are associated with security personnel. There is no widely agreed upon distinction between companies offering military services and those providing security services. That's why this term PMSCs is so broad. And another thing that I found...
and the first is documentation of atrocities and human rights abuses by PMCs and mercenary groups. There has been extensive open source research and digital investigations carried out of PMC activities and human rights abuses, particularly when it comes, I think it was fair to say, to Wagner Group and other Kremlin-backed affiliates. Often working in collaboration with affected populations, civil society organizations have been employing cutting-edge research techniques and technology to capture, assess, and verify open-source data confirming human rights abuses committed by PMCs and mercenary groups.
The accountability and what can be done in terms of the human rights impact. First, there are several international legally binding instruments related to different types of arms transfer, trade, and state obligations in the context of these transfers. They have some fairly good ratification, so the obligations are quite clear for states. The states should know that.
Involving Canada's obligations to regulate a company registered in Canada that was involved in Israeli settlement building. And although the case, I think, didn't go anywhere because of some question of standing, the merits were not argued that a company could be held responsible for failing to properly regulate companies that then go on to commit abuses extraterritorially. The effective controls
regulations in place, as Yelena said, in countries to prevent also their nationals to become mercenaries, especially in post-conflict situations. We see that there has been little support to this idea of prevention over the past years. We see lots of companies now joining ICOCA because of the market pressure, because of regulations adopted at regional levels, such as the European Union, which impose on companies operating there to